Hola, buenos dias. My name is James Sullivan. I'm from England. I'm going to speak in English, so I hope you understand me. If you don't, please let me know. I'll try and enunciate more clearly. Okay, so before we start, I think you already know this, but we're going to have two 40-minute sessions with a break in the middle for a coffee. The slides, as Christina's mentioned, will be available on your library website. Please ask me questions at any time, especially, as I said, if you don't understand exactly what I'm saying, I can try and rephrase what I'm saying. And hopefully at the end of the presentation, you'll feel a little bit more confident about submitting to a journal, whether it's at Wiley or another publisher. Okay, so I've divided the presentation into 4 parts. The first part is about how you write your paper. The second is about the submission and peer review process. The third is about production, what happens when your paper goes to the publisher, and importantly, what you do about copyright. And the final part, part 4, is what you can do post-publication to promote your article. So the first 2 parts are the most important. I'll be able to give you some insight from the publisher's viewpoint. I've been a publishing manager for almost 15 years with Wiley, with Elsevier, with Blackwell. Prior to that, I was a research scientist. I wasn't very good at it. And before that, I did a degree in chemistry. I don't receive manuscripts, appoint reviewers, and make decisions on manuscripts. That's done by an external academic editor in a university like here. So I went to London and I interviewed one of my editors who was able to help me answering some questions about writing your paper and about the submission and peer review process. So we are going to watch 4 fairly short videos where Professor Misha Dola from King's College in London will hopefully give you some advice and hints about what he looks for as a Wiley journal editor. So part 1, writing your paper, we're going to look at the initial points you need to consider. So fairly obviously, how much research have you done, data collected? Do you want to write a full original article? Maybe you want to write a letter, a review paper, or a conference paper. And also, you're going to maybe want to consider a little bit about the style of paper you're writing, depending on the field you're working in. Okay, so we'll have a look now at the first video with Professor Misha Dola.
Something in effect along the Doppler effect. Right, so the Doppler effect was around this is known for centuries for this international speaking parts. What is new is putting them together in the end extremely sensitive.
Now, typically, you would have already done some research, so you have some volume of, material assembled. It might be results, it might be actually mathematical formulas, and depending on the volume and the quality of the work you have done, the research work, that would determine essentially what type of publication you're after. So, if it's just a fairly small contribution which you want to get through very quickly, that would be a conference paper. If it is something which is quite fundamental but not so big, maybe you want to make it a letter. If it is an overview, a really guiding vision, it's a magazine paper. And if it is a very significant contribution, that would be a transactions paper you're looking for. Now, each of these publication venues has a very different cycle. So conference is typically happen very quickly. So you have submission, you get very quickly your result, whether it's accepted, rejected, and it's being published then after a while. The same with letters, so you get a fairly quick response. Now, the drawback on letters and conferences is that it's a yes or a no, so you have no chance to respond to any questions or concerns raised. Whereas with the magazine papers and with the transactional journal papers, you actually have a chance to engage with the reviewers and make your point, really respond to some worries they have or some criticism which might be there, so you can improve the paper until it is ready really to be published in the community. The style probably will differ from community to community. So mathematicians are allowed for a very rigorous way of writing papers, whereas biologists may have a more verbal way of explaining things, putting things in context. Telecom engineering, the ETT, which I'm editor-in-chief of, is something in between. So we look for rigorous discussion of the result, whilst we also out for a more informal representation and presentation of the context of the research really done. It doesn't mean you should write in a total street talking way of fashion, so it has to be rigorous. And the best way actually of finding out what suits your community is just to read a lot. So what you should do is, as an author, just try to figure out what's the state of the art in my community, how do people write really, what's the language, and you will see that, you know, just by reading that, you will essentially learn how to formulate your subject area in the most optimal way.
Okay, so he talks quite quickly. I will try to summarize the key points that Misha spoke about and add in a few of my own as well. So obviously the first point, deciding the type of manuscript you want to write, I think the best advice he gives is read a lot within your community to find out the current state of the art, the current style of writing. A lot of editors say to me, obviously you're writing in English, so please use the spell checker in Microsoft Word. It's there to help us, me included. Some people may have friends who are native English speakers. You can always ask them to help you check your manuscript. And we even have a special English editing service at Wiley. It isn't free, you have to pay for this service, but they guarantee that your English will be good enough to be sent for peer review. So in summary, you need to present a good manuscript into the peer review system to show the reviewers, the editors, the publisher that you care about what you're writing about, you care about your research. So continuing in part one, we're going to look now at the structure and content of a typical research article. We all know the normal format, title, author's abstract, etc. But in the next video, we're going to get a lot more information from Misha Dola about what you should include in each section, and he's going to give again some hints and advice on what to include.
So typically, you would start with a title, then the author, the complete author list. You would have an abstract, some keywords. You have an introduction. You then have a general methodology section. You would have a section where you introduce your real scientific contribution, your analysis. You would then have a section which deals with the results, and then a section essentially also which deals with the discussion of the results, the trends, whilst at the very end you're concluding the paper and giving some future work. And that is then followed by some bibliography and some acknowledgements. In the title, you really want to make a title very catchy. That's essentially your advertisement of the paper. It has to be crispy. You may want to put it in form of a question, which really gets the attention of the reviewer, of the audience. It should contain also the keywords of your research. So you really want to make sure that everything you deal with in the paper is somehow condensed within the title. because it is only the title and the keywords essentially which is being picked up by search engines like Google. If you want to make sure that your paper appears with a typical search, you want to put that information in the title. Now, when it comes to the author list, really make sure you have a complete list of authors there. Decide priori which order you want to take there, so different communities handle it differently. For instance, one community would do it in alphabetical order, and another you would do it by contribution, etc. Now, when it comes to the abstract is something which is a condensed version of the paper. So what I typically say is that every sentence in the abstract should be a reflection of a single section of the paper. So if you have 5 sections or 6 sections of the paper, you should have six sentences in the abstract essentially. The first sentence would essentially give the context, the second sentence would give essentially the methodology, then the research conducted, the findings, and what the future outlook might be. When it comes to the keywords, then again, really make sure that you put in the reflective keywords of your paper. Make sure it's really cutting edge stuff so people get interested really in the keywords. The search engines pick this up, and you really come up on the searches when somebody's looking for stuff done in your area. Now, when it comes to the introduction, make sure that the introduction is concise, whilst you also want to make sure that it essentially positions the paper with respect, the prior art. It shows really the context of the research, why you're doing, what type of challenges you're addressing. Make sure that you don't write it in a very philosophical style, so it has to be scientific at the end of the day. You also may want to introduce essentially your contribution, really what you have contributed in this paper, to make crystal clear what's the advancement with respect of the state of the art. Now, in the subsequent sections, you really want to delve into the actual scientific content, so the methodology. You want to really explain what your research is. Most likely you're going to leverage on research done before. Don't reproduce that, really compress that, maybe in a single paragraph, in a single equation, reference that, or simply just reference that will do the job. People will follow that up, so you can really concentrate on your own contribution. When it comes to the result and the simulation section, really make sure that the graphs you put up have a meaning, that all the axes are labeled, all the graphs are essentially labeled, that trends are well explained, that just looking at the graph, I understand what's happening without the need to read essentially the whole paper. At the same time, within the paper, you should elaborate on the trends, you should elaborate on the advancement, on the percentage improvement, on whatever you deem is really important for your community. Now, on the concluding part then, that should not only be a copy-paste of the abstract in past tense. You really want to summarize key findings. You want to say that the specific techniques I introduced gave me a gain of X% with respect to the state of the art. It opens that type of avenues, and that's the type of future research I want to do. At the very end, please put in acknowledgements, anybody who's helped essentially to contribute to the work, and the bibliography, make sure it is really up to date. You really want to make sure that you're citing latest papers in the field. So if your paper is submitted in the year we're filming this, at 2014, make sure you cite papers from 2014 and 2013, so the reviewers and the reader understands that's really cutting edge work you're doing here.
Okay, so again, Misha's given us some good tips there. Clearly, each section within your article has a very defined purpose. Different editors will probably give you different advice, so it's worth asking around when you go to conferences or when you're with colleagues for their opinions. I think the main thing to take away is that you need good keywords in your title. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in my next slides. Please make sure your author list is complete and follows the style guidelines for the particular journal. Your abstract needs to be well structured. Again, this is something that Google searches for. All abstracts with most publishers are generally free and available online. So again, it's the way you publicize your work. And write in a clear, concise style, not too philosophical. It was a beautiful day in Valladolid when I woke up and I went to the laboratory. No, it needs to be nice and crisp, catchy, and concise. And And check your references, because that is one of the areas that editors really have a headache, making sure that your references are in the correct style and are complete. So I will quickly go through some of the key parts of the paper just to reiterate that the title is your way of attracting readers' attentions, make it as explicit as possible, optimize it by thinking of how people search for your work. Some editors may be able to work with you prior to peer review about optimizing your title, and you can apply these ideas throughout your paper. So if you have a subtitle, section titles, please use this sort of logic there as well. One thing you can do is state a key finding or frame it as a question to make your title catchy. Make it short, typically up to 15 words. You can use punctuation even to try and make it easier to digest. As I said, some journals may even allow you a subtitle. And some editors say maybe think about your title before you even start writing the main body of your text. Others don't, but it's worth bearing in mind. So in the abstract, as human beings, our attention span is very good at the start of reading, gets worse through the middle, and towards the end we become interested again. So try and put something interesting and important as your first sentence, and something important about the future direction of your work as the final sentence, and make the middle of your abstract as concise as possible. So something like this, where you'd have an important insight to start with, your future directions as the final sentence, and the main body as concise as possible. You might want to apply the principle of chunking or breaking down your work into sections that aren't too long. So if you have a section heading and lots of words after, it's quite hard to digest. If you have a section heading and subtitles, it's easy to remember, and try and keep those sections as short as possible, 600 words, maybe 300 words even. We all know Google and the fact that it uses this very advanced algorithm with 200 variables to search for words on the internet. I don't know what's in the algorithm. If I did, I probably wouldn't be sat here today, I'm afraid. But we do know that there are certain things that it looks for. It checks through the title, subtitle, and section headings for your keywords. So put your keywords in the title, in the abstract, repeat them. Where possible in the main body, put them there as well. And try to be consistent in your terminology. There may be variants of spelling, some with punctuation, with hyphens. Use the current state-of-the-art nomenclature and be consistent through your work. And that way, fingers crossed, Google will find your work more easily. In the main text, try, as I've mentioned several times, to be as concise and short sentences as possible. As Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changin'. Back in the 1300s, Chaucer averaged 49 words in a sentence. By the time we get to Dickens, in the 1800s, it was down to 20 words in a sentence. And this lady, J.K. Rowling, who wrote some books about Harry Potter, if you've heard of him, you're down to 12 words in a sentence. So you can apply this kind of logic to your writing as well. Again, a fairly obvious thing, but where you can, put your information into tables, graphs, etc. As Misha said, a reviewer should be able to look at your graphs. They'll be very well signed, that they can not even need to read all of the text to know what your research and results were about. So the final slide in this section is about references. As I mentioned, for editors, this is their main headache. Follow the style guidelines. Of course, please make sure that you do cite any work that you've written about. You don't want to be asked if you've plagiarized something. Don't feel compelled to put extra references in if they're not relevant just to make it look more important, and avoid excessive self-citations to your own work and also to work in your group or even in your region, as that can raise some questions and doubts sometimes. So all this adds up to what might be a fairly frustrating process. One editor said to me, an option is to maybe even write backwards. If you start with your figures table, methods, conclusions, and work back to your title, it may work better for you. It's worth a try. So the second part of the presentation, we're going to look at the submission and peer review process. So this is the real meat and veg of the process. First of all, you're going to want to choose which journal to submit to. The easiest way to do this is obviously look through your references. There you'll see the types of journals you've been referencing. You can create a short list and then go to each of those journals and have a look at what they are currently publishing, their actual hot topics, types of articles that they are accepting. You want to consider the impact factor of the journal and its acceptance rates. Obviously, if you decide to send your paper to Nature, it's going to be more difficult to get it accepted than in a maybe regional journal. Most importantly of all, you need to think about your audience. If you're going to write about a certain topic, make sure they're the people reading, using that journal. Obviously, if it's, again, of a local interest, maybe you're talking about a healthcare system that's particular to Spain and only of interest to Spanish people, you need to consider that, or whether it is really of international importance. All of the major publishers have online versions of their journals, so you can go and have a look at each one, have a look at the author guidelines, have a look at the abstracts and read through to see what type of papers they are publishing. To look at the online submissions, so in the olden days we used to send manuscripts off in the post on paper. Not many journals accept papers physically anymore. It's all done online through an online submission system like this. When you submit your paper online, you'll create an account for each specific journal. Please be very careful and follow through the author guidelines, what they ask you to do. So when you submit a paper, it doesn't go straight to the academic editor at university. It will come to somebody like me or my team in Oxford, and they will check, first of all, have you followed the guidelines? So obviously it's written in English. Is it of the correct length? There may be a word limit. Have you put the figures in the body of the text, or have you put the figures in separate files? Different journals will have different specifications. The most important thing is that every single paper we receive is checked electronically for plagiarism. And every year we have a lot of cases where people's papers are rejected, obviously, because they've plagiarized other people's work, and it's not a good start to your publishing career.
So the submission process these days is actually fairly simple. It's all handled electronically. Most journals use the Manuscript Central database system, which is very intuitive. You log in. If you don't have a login, you would register essentially with the specific journal under consideration. Once you're inside, you would choose the keywords. Essentially, you would choose the type of publication you're after, whether that's a letter, whether it's a journal invited paper, a special issue paper. Put in the keywords. You should add all the authors which have co-authored the paper. That's very important to understand conflict of interest, which is flagging in the actual site. You then upload the paper, the actual paper. Some editors, some journals essentially request just the PDF. Others may request additional material, but typically if you just submit the PDF, you're fine. Then you also may want to indicate preferred reviewers. So typically, if you submit a few names, one of them might be considered if the review process has troubles actually locating independent reviewers. You also want to add a cover letter really for the submission process. Some journals pay attention to that, other journals don't. So personally in ETT we don't pay too much attention to the cover letters, but you may want to do it. So you submit your paper and then it is off to the peer review process really.
So just to reiterate, summarize, you create an online account, carefully follow the process, make sure that when you input the author names into the system, it matches exactly what is on your Word or PDF document that you've submitted. Journals, as I mentioned, have an editorial office, so prior to peer review you can contact Wiley or any other publisher. You don't have to go straight to the academic editor at this point. Some journals may ask you to include a covering letter. Not all do. It can be useful. You can highlight to the editor maybe conflicts of interest, certain reviewers that you may not want to review your paper for various reasons. You're not going to have your paper rejected because of the covering letter, but it may just help to speed up the process. If you only remember one thing today, please remember this. You can only submit to one journal at a time. Okay, it sounds very obvious, but every year we have problems in this area. You have to wait until you have a decision on your manuscript. If it's taking a very long time, which it can do, then contact the office, contact the editor and ask them what's happening. If you're not happy, if it's taking too long, you can withdraw your paper. Okay, but do not think, oh, it's taken a very long time, I'm going to also submit now to this other journal. Okay, so now is the really important part of the presentation, peer review. You may recognize some of these people. None of my editors are like this, I must say. So in our final video, Misha Dola is going to talk through his views on the peer review process.
Now, as for the peer review process, it is a standardized procedure. What happens, your paper arrives essentially with the editor-in-chief eventually. The editor-in-chief will choose a suitable handling editor which would be responsible for getting in the reviews for your paper. The role of this editor is essentially to secure within a certain time frame, which in the case of ETT is about 6 to 8 weeks, to find 2 to 3 independent reviews and to make sure that we get in these reviews in due time. Typically the handling editor would essentially try to assign at the very beginning 4 to 5 to 6 reviews to make sure that really 2 to 3 high quality reviews come in. Now, when the reviews come in, the handling editor would first check essentially the quality of the reviews. So if they're not good enough, they would be essentially sent back to the reviewers, so they would essentially have the opportunity to improve that. Once the quality is good, the editor would essentially take a decision on the paper, where the choice typically is you reject the paper, you accept it with major revisions, you accept it with minor revisions, or you just accept it as is. Now, if it's rejected, it's rejected, and I'll come to that in a moment. If it is accepted with some minor revisions or major revisions, please make sure to address point by point the issues raised by the reviewers, and you want to put this in a separate document detailing exactly how you address the specific issue. You may not want to be addressing all of them, so if you don't agree with the specific issue which a reviewer raised, you may want to say why you don't agree, but you need to really respond point by point, and that needs to be really rigorously done. You resubmit your paper, again you will get a notification after a while whether that has been accepted or rejected, or whether you need to do more changes. Now, if it gets rejected, don't be upset about it, really. Probably you will have received a lot of good feedback. There will be a reason for that. It allows you essentially to build your next paper. What you should also avoid is just to take the very same paper and submit it to another journal, because chances are very, very high that you will end up with exactly the same set of reviewers, because at the end of the day, the community is not so big. You also will want to avoid the submission of the same or more or less the same type of work to two different journals. If it's really the same, that's plagiarism. You can't do that. That's you would be banned or blacklisted essentially from these journals. You need to have a difference of at least 30 to 40% to make sure that that's really a different piece of work which you could submit essentially sequentially or subsequently. Now, if it gets accepted, that's great news. You want to address the final comments very quickly. You typically will be contacted by not by the editor, but by the publisher about the final paper. You need to submit copyright forms, etc., etc. And then that paper will be published typically in an online format, so you can essentially be cited, and it will finally be published in an issue once the publication queue has reached your paper, and essentially your paper can be published to a wider audience with a specific volume assigned. So every journal handles that really differently, depends on what really the journal is after. So some journals really want to emphasize the rigor of the work conducted. Other journals want to emphasize really the breakthrough actually achieved with the work, the extra achieved versus the state of the art, the emerging character like we have in our journal. So that is typically what the reviewers would take off. It's really, is it suitable? Is it really within the scope of the journal? So they would check that. Is that really high quality work? Is that transaction work? Is that letter work, magazine work, etc.? Are the references up to date? So everything we talked about at the beginning when you write your paper is what essentially the reviewers would take off.
So, as Misha says there, the important point is the points that the reviewers are looking for are exactly those that we described in part one, the things you should be doing when you write your manuscript. So, is it novel and interesting, the work? Is it written concisely, scientifically? Is it comprehensive, the research that you've done? Are the conclusions accurate? Is the abstract concise? Do you have all the citations that should be there, and are there adequate citations? And again, is the language acceptable? So in summary, not many papers, if any, get accepted straight away. A lot of papers do get rejected because of the amount of submissions journals get. You're very likely to at some point be asked to revise your paper with either minor or major revisions. As it says in the video, please take that as a very methodical point-by-point approach to answer all of the points raised by the reviewers. You may have 2 or 3 fairly lengthy reviews come back about your paper, and you need to analyse and answer all of the points raised. If you feel that something a reviewer said is incorrect, of course you can challenge it. This is all part of the review process. There are many reasons for rejection, and nowadays, because of the volume of submissions from all over the world, it's harder and harder to get papers into high quality, high impact journals. That's why you need to follow all these steps to really make sure you tick all the boxes. These are some of the reasons for rejection, but most importantly of all, as Misha says, and all editors would say to you, do not feel discouraged or downhearted if you're rejected, because well over 50-60% of papers are rejected, and on certainly the high-end, high-impact journals that I run, we're looking at 80% rejection. That's from well-established academics. Okay. This slide just shows us the overall peer review process. I just put this here to indicate this step here, which we call triage, thanks to the French for that word. The point about this is that a lot of papers will come to the academic editor and not even go into peer review if they don't meet the initial criteria, or if the editor feels it isn't really of high enough interest to that particular publication. But given you get through that stage, and given you go through peer review and answer all of the revisions, your paper is accepted, and then it enters the world of production at Wiley or another publisher. The final slide on this section, just a few summary of tips. Obviously, the peer review process is a process of learning, taking feedback. The most important thing here is please be polite, as you always are, in your transactions and communications. Behind the online submission system, behind the website and the emails are a group of people, the publishers and editors, who are working hard to make this a good publication and to make your publication the best that it can be. Okay, that concludes the first two sections. Sections 3 and 4 are going to be a lot shorter. Part 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about production and copyright. Production is the remit of the publisher, obviously. Your main role is to check your proofs and to get those back as quickly as you can. The sooner you correct your proofs, the sooner we can put your paper online and it can be cited. The second thing to remember at this point is that you need to sign a copyright transfer form. This again is the fundamental part of the publishing process. You assign copyright to the publisher to allow them to publish it. Without this, we cannot publish your work. So a typical workflow would be, once the editor has accepted your paper, the electronic files come into production, they are sent away to be typeset and edited, the proofs come in, you check and correct your proofs until the article is ready, and then once it's published online, not in an issue but just published online, people can cite your work. This is very important to remember. There are long publication queues. You may not see your article published until 2015 or 2016 in a physical issue, but it's online and people can go and read it and cite it and use it. So that's very important to remember. Okay, the next few slides are quite complicated. I'll try to be as clear as possible. When you sign your transfer agreement, you are also allowing yourself to archive your material. Okay, you assign the copyright to the publisher to allow us to publish it in a specific journal, but the work is still yours and you have a lot of liberty, a lot of rights to do things with your work, okay? To help orient ourselves, I've just put a series of definitions as used at Wiley. So the paper that you put into the system, the Word document PDF, that hasn't gone into peer review, we call a preprint or the submitted version. This allows you a lot of liberties. What you can do with this work is pretty much within your remit. Once it's gone through peer review, we call that a postprint or the accepted author manuscript. This has some freedoms with it, but not as many as the preprint. And then finally, we have something called the version of record, which is the version you see when you go to the online library, which is the fully formatted, anywhere article with bells and whistles and all of the stuff that the publisher has added to your work. So I'm going to look at the preprint and postprint. So in preprint, as I said, you actually have a lot of liberties of what you can do. You can put this on preprint servers, and you could put it on repositories, such as the one you have here in Valladolid in your university, UVADoc, I believe it's called. You can put that there, and so long as you include this citation at the bottom, you can put that there and anyone can go and read it, okay? What you cannot do is, once your paper's published, go back and replace it, okay? This is a static proposition. The more interesting part is the postprint, and this is essentially green open access. I'm not going to talk about open access today, but this is essentially what people would define as green open access. So this is your work, it's been peer reviewed, but it hasn't gone into the production process, and you are allowed to put this on your institutional archives, personal internal websites after an embargo period of 12 months for scientific journals and 24 months for social sciences. And again, you cannot go back and replace it with the final version or version of record, and you have to put a link saying where the final version is available. Of course, in all this, you cannot do anything which is a type of negotiation. You can't create a website and put your work there and say, please pay me 20 euros to download my article. This is obviously contravening all the copyright laws. But you do have a lot of liberty with your postprint to share it within your academic community, and as I said, post it on your university library for people to access. You also have a lot of liberty with small sections of your work, okay, so diagrams, short paragraphs, etc. You can reuse them later on, but as always, be sure to cite that. Ethics is a big question nowadays. I think we've mentioned lots of times, only submitting to the one journal, but also be careful. If you've done research, don't try to write too many papers based on that one piece of research. It will be noticed by editors and reviewers. You need to make sure you have at least 30-40% or more differential with the papers you're submitting, okay? And of course, acknowledge everyone involved in the work. When you're putting your name on the article, it's the place where you're currently working, not the place where you did your PhD or maybe even carried out the research. You need to put your current address. Wiley has a fairly extensive website talking just about ethics. This is quite a useful one. I'd recommend going there if you have general questions. So we've reached the final section. You've written your paper, it's been accepted, it's been published. Now what can you do as the author to really help more people access your work? Well, I think fairly clearly from what we've discussed today, most people come in via Google. So if you follow the steps I've suggested with your keywords, etc., you can promote people to go to your work. Obviously also use your library services, indexing your work, and using abstracting, table of contents alerts, etc. This is a rather complicated slide, but I'll just try to summarize that your library can help you when you're connecting with readers. Obviously, make sure they have access to the journal you've submitted to. Use your media relations office if you have one, your faculty website. Use your email signature. You can put a link at the bottom to the work you've done. You can, of course, use our old friend social media, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can contact us at the publisher and say, I've written a blog, I include my work here and other things. Could you link to it? Could you make a piece of news about this? Yes, maybe we can. It's always worth asking the publisher to help you market your work. This slide just gives some additional resources, some links. There are lots of books and resources to help you write your paper, to explain about ethics. And the final thing I would say is that the publishers, the editors are always very happy to answer questions and to help you with your work. So that ends my presentation. I'm sure there are lots of questions.
Si queréis hacer las preguntas en castellano, él entiende un poquito y si no se las traduzco yo, ¿de acuerdo? Que el tema del idioma no nos frene a hacer preguntas, ¿vale?
I prefer easy questions if possible.
¿Dónde está? Sorry, I don't know if it is easy, but I will try my best.
Okay.
So I have a question about the references for the when you write something. I mean, you're reading another article, and when you find something that author, that's called Peter, says that, for example, John says something. Then when you write it, you said that the same paragraph, but you just name John. Well, you should also say that Peter says that John says, and then you have to put it in the bibliography, both, or just Peter. I don't know if you understood.
I kind of understand, yeah. I think there is a difference between citing someone and quoting someone. I think that's your distinction.
Yeah.
And some of the guidelines in that last slide will help. It depends slightly again on the field you work in, okay? And some may prefer that you insert the quote into the text, others that you cite it in a certain way with just a number, or that you put the name. It's slightly dependent on the field.
I mean, because for example, I have written in something just now, and so somebody told me that I should put both. When they were reading, they wanted to check that references in my bibliography, and it wasn't there because this references was already in another article I have written. So I don't know if I should put both, and in this case it would be a little bit difficult because I don't know where exactly these references that somebody else has referent. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So you're talking about you're referencing something, and within that reference there is a subsequent
That's
reference. Right. I'm not too sure. I think you have to check with the particular journal what is their typical rule. Practically, really, you should only have to put one reference, and then they should go and check the subsequent reference. But you might want to include, for example, maybe a footnote instead, just saying, you know, by the way, you need to check this as well.
Oh, okay, thank
you. Since this is a Wiley exposition also, presentation, do you guys have in the website some tools to measure the quality of the journals, authors, and the paper?
¿Te refieres al metrics?
Yeah.
Sí, ahora ya está disponible los Almetrics en... Are they available in all articles? I think so.
Yeah, it does vary a little bit. When an article is open access, certainly they include now the number of downloads the article's received. On most papers, we don't have the metrics there online up front, but if you contact us directly, we would be able to give them to you. Yeah. Most people would go to the Thomson ISI website to look at the sort of citation rates. Is the most common public metric that the papers will have. You can contact us if you want to know about acceptance rates, accept and reject. But we don't publish those as a matter of course. Yeah.
Hi, James.
Hi there.
Is it very important to include future research lines in your article?
Yes.
Associate your topic?
It's journal dependent. So Misha Dola there, the journal we started together is called Emerging Transactions on Telecommunications. So emerging gives you an idea that it's looking to the future. I think in general it's good to include your future directions in your abstract, and at the end, yes, it certainly will give the reviewers a feeling of what you're doing and the direction you're moving in. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Bueno, a mí también me gustaría hacer una pregunta.
Sí.
Has aludido a UBADOC, el repositorio de la universidad, pero me gustaría si pudieses exponer ¿qué precauciones o qué información tiene que saber un investigador para saber que además de publicar en una revista, puede, con el tiempo, ponerlo en abierto en Ubadoc?
Okay, so this is to do with the archiving of your paper. And I mentioned this earlier on in the slides. Once your paper has been accepted, you have a 12-month or 24-month embargo period, 12 months for scientific, technical, medical, and 24 months for social sciences. And after that embargo period, you can place your accepted versions, that's the paper that's been peer-reviewed, on your personal websites, your university, library websites, and on some servers as well. What you always just need to be mindful of is that you don't do anything that is with a financial benefit. That obviously goes against the copyright law. You also have a lot of liberties to pass the PDF of your work, even the final version, amongst colleagues within your university. You're not going to be infringing or breaking any laws by doing that. Ultimately, if you're unsure, you can contact the publisher to check, okay? And also, on every journal, there is something called a rights link or permission link. So if you want to reuse or copy part of that article for a reason, you can again quickly check with the publisher at Wiley, and they'll say to you, yes, that's fine, go ahead, use that figure, use that paragraph, we assign those rights to you. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I will just wish you all good luck, suerte, and thank you for listening.